In 2019, Atatiana Jefferson, a college graduate with aspirations of curing diseases while supporting and protecting her family, would be recognized worldwide when her life was tragically taken by a negligent, trigger-happy member of law enforcement. Over the years, her friends, her family, and her community, and people around the world would fight to get justice for Atatiana, but those close to her would also lose their lives in the time that followed. You're watching Justified by Jury, and in the 15th chapter of the Unfortunate Demise series, we will detail Atatiana's life, the events surrounding her murder, her assailant's trial, and the aftermath as her loving family was dealt multiple tragedies in a brief time span. If there are any other crime stories you'd like to see covered on the channel, please leave your suggestions in the comments below. Let's get started. Atatiana Jefferson was born on November 28, 1990, in Fort Worth, Texas, where she spent most of her life. Growing up with two sisters and a brother, she was the baby of the family and went by Tay. She was described as a kind, smart, and nurturing soul, as she was always there for her family. But she was also inquisitive, always trying to learn more and do more. She read constantly and became enamored with science, and her favorite TV show was Bill Nye the Science Guy. In school, she would get straight A's on her report card and even helped her older siblings with their homework. She would attend Cedar Hill High School, where she played clarinet in a band and earned a reputation for being nice to the outcast students. She would spend her senior year at Lake Highlands High School, where she graduated in 2010. From there, she would attend Xavier University of Louisiana, a historically black Catholic university, as a pre-med student.
Hi, my name is Atatiana Jefferson, and I'm doing lab exercise 5 for AMP1 lab. This here is the cranial cavity. This is the thoracic cavity here, and the spinal cavity. And this is Gillian, my skeleton. Thank you, Gillian. Again, I was Atatiana Jefferson doing Lab 5 for AMP1. Thank you.
She would graduate in 2014 with a Bachelor of Science degree in biology. Afterwards, she got a job as a pharmaceutical equipment sales representative and began saving up for medical school. Ultimately, her dream was to become a doctor and perhaps one day cure diabetes, which she was diagnosed with in her preteens. She saw how health problems affected her family as well, and she was enlisted to aid them with their struggles. She would help her father, Marquise, with his treatment as he wheezed through a chronic pulmonary disease, and told him that she planned to become a doctor and eventually be able to eliminate asthma altogether one day. Her older sister, Amber, had suffered health problems too. She had undergone 2 major heart surgeries, one in 2016 and again in 2019, and while she recovered, one of her sons, 8-year-old Zion, was staying with their mother, Yolanda, who would prepare her grandson for school and made sure he had everything a young boy needed. But as Yolanda's own health started to decline, Atatiana would move back home to take care of them both. But she and Zion were already like best friends. She was like his second mom. Whenever you saw her, you saw him. Most people thought he was hers. She made sure her mother got back and forth to her health appointments and would stop by the hospital to also visit her sister as she recovered from major surgeries. But by the weekend of October 11th, 2019, her mother's health had worsened and she was also hospitalized. That left Atatiana with her 8-year-old nephew at the family house for the weekend. But she loved her nephew so much and made sure to spoil them with fun activities. Her and her eldest sister, Ashley, had plans to take the boys to the fair on Saturday and bring back gifts for the rest of the family. But instead of going to the fair with his aunt, Zion would watch his aunt be gunned down while trying to protect him. Now, as we go into the events surrounding Atatiana's death, I'm going to put in a disclaimer as some of the details might be too graphic for some listeners. Viewer discretion is advised. The night of Friday, October 11th, started off as a fun-filled evening with Atatiana and Zion playing Call of Duty, a video game, as she was a big gamer. They even invited friends to join the stream and play live from their devices in their homes. Atatiana had made dinner, but it had accidentally burned, so she would open the front door and the side door to air out the smell. The screen doors, however, were closed. It was the first fall chill of the season, and so they didn't mind letting the outside breeze come through to cool down the house either. Now, they had been up on the game all night, and if you know anything about playing video games, you know that the time passes quickly. But by 2 a.m. on October 12th, the front door and side door were still open with the lights on, and one of the neighbors, James Smith, had grown worried as this was out of the ordinary. He knew Yolanda had a heart condition and had recently been in and out of intensive care, so out of concern, he would call a non-emergency number and ask that the authorities do a welfare check on the home.
I'm calling about my neighbor.
Okay, what's the address?
1203 East Allen Avenue.
Okay, 1203 East Allen Avenue. What's going on there?
Well, the front doors have been open since 10 o'clock, and I haven't seen anybody moving around. It's not normal for them to have both of the doors open this time of night.
Okay, you know if anyone is inside?
No, I'm not sure. Both of the cars are there.
And they're in the driveway?
Both the cars in the driveway, yes.
Gotcha. And are they usually home at this time?
They're usually home, but they never had both of the front doors open with the lights on, like I can see straight through the house. Well, my sister woke me up. She stays across the street, and then I live on the opposite side of my sister.
Okay. And the address that you gave me, 1203, that's their address, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll have an officer come by. They're already being dispatched now, okay?
Okay, appreciate it. I mean, it's just not normal for them to have both the doors open this late that long.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Though this was clearly a welfare call, the officers were dispatched to an open structure call, which usually relates to a potential burglary, and the police policy for handling these calls is vastly different from one another. The officers that were dispatched to the home were Carol Darch and Aaron Dean, who had only been with Fort Worth PD for 18 months at this point, and it had already been noted in his training records that he had tunnel vision and that he needed improvement on communicating with the public and fellow officers. In his interview video taken a year and a half before the shooting, he was asked just how comfortable he was with killing someone.
Will you be able to kill somebody if you have to?
No problem.
Though James simply called out of concern for his neighbor, he had unintentionally sent an assassin to their house. Approaching the situation like a burglary in progress, around 2:28 a.m., Officer Dean and his partner would pull up to the house on East Allen Avenue, but parked further down the street and out of view. Using a live reenactment provided by ABC in Dreams Time, which includes body cam footage, I will describe step-by-step actions that the pair took. They would approach the house around 2:31 and would see the doors open. With Officer Dean leading the way, they would walk around the right side of the home, under the carport, and look at the home through the screen door. But neither officer attempted to open the doors and enter the home, nor would they announce their presence. They continued walking towards the back of the house, passing the two cars in the driveway. A minute has passed, and now they're at the back of the house, and Officer Dean is opening the gate into the backyard. At this point, Atatiana heard noises coming from outside the house. She stopped the game and asked her nephew if he had heard anything, and he had replied no. But after hearing more noises, she told her nephew to get down, and that's when she retrieved her legally owned firearm, as she was well within her rights to do so as a license holder in the state of Texas, and made her way to the back window to investigate. But by the time that Officer Dean saw Atatiana through the window, he yelled,
"Put your hands up! Show me your hands!"
and fired one round which struck Atatiana in the heart before traveling downward, hitting her liver and her kidney. She immediately fell backwards, and once the officers were inside, in the full body cam video which was later played in court, she can be heard crying before she was heard groaning, which can only be described as the sounds of someone giving up the ghost, and it was a very chilling audio. All of this in front of her 8-year-old nephew. Upon seeing Zion, Carol would immediately wrap him up in a blanket and take him outside to sit on the curb while EMTs were called out, and other officers, including the police chief, arrived at the scene. Officers attempted to perform chest compressions on Atatiana before the paramedic took over and continued the life-saving procedures for 20 more minutes, but to no avail, and she would be pronounced dead at 3:05 a.m. The medical examiner Richard Fries would later state that she had bled to death and probably would not have survived even if paramedics took her immediately to the hospital. Around 4:45 a.m., her nephew Zion would be taken into questioning and asked to recount everything that happened. Still in shock, he would break down.
I don't want people do that to other people. They don't go right. I understand, fine. It makes me wonder who I'm going to live with now.
Now, Carol would give several interviews throughout much of the day explaining her side of the story, but as for Aaron Dean, police records indicated that he opted out of providing any interviews on the date of the shooting, and his legal counsel said he would provide a written statement detailing his account instead, but he never did. Atatiana's family would be notified of her death, but not the details surrounding it. Her sister Amber was being discharged from the hospital and was contacted to come pick her son up from a facility, and he was the one that broke the news to her.
The first time I actually got to see him and pick him up from a facility for children, the first thing he told me was he was sad. And I asked him, why was he sad? And he told me because the police had shot his aunt. And at that time, I knew nothing about that. So he was the one who actually told me what happened. But at this time, he's my motivation. He's my biggest encourager. In the middle of the night when I'm crying, he wakes up and tells me to breathe in my nose and out my mouth. He holds me, he hugs me. And these are the things I should be doing for him, but he's not reacting in that manner. He's helping me to be strong. And I believe that's because my sister had a big part in that.
As the word began to spread about Atatiana's unjustified death at the hands of an officer, her family, her community, and social media were all outraged. There were protests in the streets and in the courts, as people were furious that another black life was taken by somebody sworn to protect and serve, and they wanted answers. The family would hire civil rights attorney Lee Merritt to represent them as they proceeded with the courts. The city itself was fed up with the Fort Worth Police Department, as there had been 7 officer-involved deaths in just 6 months before the death of Atatiana. The family was adamant that they did not want Fort Worth Police Department running this investigation. They knew how important it was to see her killer face justice for this crime. Atatiana was no stranger to social justice and holding people accountable. Years prior, when a viral video of a white bus driver attacking a black passenger and dragging him off the bus for asking too many questions started going viral, people were defending the bus driver's character, saying that he was just having a bad day. But Atatiana would sign and post a petition online demanding his arrest, and on her Facebook she wrote, "This could have happened to anyone. When you do the crime, you do the time. Crimes cannot go unpunished no matter what they are. It makes a mockery of the U.S. justice system if people feel comfortable enough to commit crimes. Whether this was his normal behavior or not, he should still be dealt with like any other person in that situation. If I speed, I will get a ticket. I may not normally speed, but that does not change the fact that I have a ticket. Unless this man has a mental illness or a massive brain tumor that impaired his judgment, he needs to be properly dealt with." And when it came time for Atatiana's killer to face consequences, he would resign from the police department. The police chief, Ed Krause, stated he planned to dishonorably discharge Dean for violating departmental policies on use of force, de-escalation, and unprofessional conduct, and for refusing to cooperate with investigators. The president of the Fort Worth Police Officers Association, Manny Ramirez, said that he and other officers with knowledge on the situation were dumbfounded as to why Dean would have fired his weapon in the first place. Many key leaders of the city of Fort Worth would apologize to the public, saying that there was no way to explain Dean's actions.
On behalf of the entire city of Fort Worth, I'm sorry.
The body camera footage, which captured the shooting, would be released to the public on October 14th. But this edited version would cut the video off right after Dean had fired the weapon, and then switch to a photo of a firearm found laying nearby in the home, in an attempt to imply that he saw the weapon and painted Atatiana as deserving of her demise. Still, with this footage, a warrant was issued for Dean's arrest, and while he was arrested at his attorney's office and charged with murder on October 15th, he was given a $200,000 bond, which he posted and was back on the streets within about 3 hours. Meanwhile, news outlets caught up with James, who was devastated and blamed himself for this entire tragic event.
I'm devastated because people say, well, James, it's not your fault. You're not your fault. But I made a call. I made the call because I thought that they were going to do what I called them to do, check on my neighbor. And they didn't do that. This is the most tragic thing in my life. The most tragic thing in my life. And there's no erasing that. It can't be erased. And I've cried, and I've prayed and I cried, not to quote a song, but I've done that. So now I have to add, I prayed, I cried, and now I'm going to fight.
Atatiana's family never once blamed James, and even went on record saying it wasn't his fault, and that their anger was strictly with the Fort Worth PD as a whole. Her brother, Adarius, said that the case needs to go beyond Dean's prosecution. He said that the whole system failed him. Whoever sent him out failed him. The training failed him. There's a lot that needs to be fixed. The family demanded an independent review of the investigation into Atatiana's death. They feared that things would go in a trajectory similar to another case just a year earlier, when a police officer in the neighboring city of Dallas entered the apartment of a 26-year-old black man named Botham John, allegedly mistaking it for her own apartment, and shot the man twice while he was eating ice cream. She says she feared for her life, and the culmination of these two incidents made black people specifically feel like, damn, you can't even be in your own home without the popos trying to end your life on this earth. Literally nowhere seemed safe. And by this time, the officer in that case's trial had wrapped up, and the victim's brother had infamously hugged her in court, showing forgiveness, and this all went down just days before Atatiana would be killed in the same manner. But Atatiana's father, Marquise Jefferson, said that when it came to his child's killer, he didn't want no damn hug.
I like this Bolton John G. I don't want no hug. That's my one and only daughter. I'll never forget this. And I don't have nothing against the neighbor. I mean, hey, if he sees something going over that house with my daughter, you need to call the police. You know what I'm saying? But it's the way the police acted. My daughter was 28 years old. Had her whole life in front of her.
In the first 3 weeks following Atatiana's death, her father was in the press venting his frustration with law enforcement, and also internal disagreements with his daughter's other family members, who he had not maintained a decent relationship with in years. Now her mother Yolanda's health had her too ill to make much of the decisions, which were being handled by extended family members and Atatiana's siblings. But Marquise, who was next of kin, argued that no one discussed any funeral/burial plans with him or any plans at all. The family had started a GoFundMe which had collected over $250,000 and was to help cover funeral expenses, counseling, travel, time off of work, and other expenses for the family, according to their attorney, Lee Merritt. Former Dallas Mavericks player Harrison Barnes and his wife Brittany were covering about 90% of the cost of the funeral services for Atatiana, and Philadelphia Eagles player Malik Jackson was to pay the remainder. But Marquise said he had no knowledge of the GoFundMe, nor did he feel it was necessary, as according to him, his daughter was under his insurance which covered funeral and burial costs. These statements would lead to a very public back and forth between family members from Atatiana's mother's side and her father's side, and things would come to a head when Atatiana's aunt, Vanita, who is her mother's older sister, would go on record and publicly denounce Marquise as Atatiana's father at the family's official press conference.
And I've heard of the allegations of Mr. Marquise Jefferson, is what I want to address, claiming to be her biological father, which he is not, nor has he ever had legal custody of her. We have not as a family heard from Mr. Jefferson, and if he cares to reach out to us, we would be more than happy to address his concerns. And I want you to know that the GoFundMe page, that is family approved to Tay's legal family.
Despite this allegation, Marquise, whose name was on Atatiana's birth certificate and whose last name she bore, would double down on his position as her father. And while the rest of her family planned her funeral at the Potter's house in Dallas, in which Bishop T.D. Jakes was scheduled to deliver the eulogy, along with special remarks from Reverend Al Sharpton, Marquise would file a temporary restraining order, which granted him full authority to make arrangements for the funeral and burial, and the judge signed the order, which meant that her family could have the service and all, but that Atatiana's body would not be present, which devastated her family. Though her wake would be held as a vigil, the official funeral was postponed, and in the end, both parties came to an agreement in court, but with a gag order forbidding either party from speaking on the decisions made in that hearing. Atatiana's funeral would officially take place on October 24th at Concord Church in Dallas, and while it was not live streamed, hundreds of mourners would attend, including several members of law enforcement, as they too felt remorse and regret that this murder took place. Her father would be in attendance, but the gag order limited what he could say, and so according to several news reports, he wouldn't speak during the service at all. He did tell several attendees and reporters that he had planned to start a foundation in Atatiana's name, but not much else.
Tay wanted me to be strong. I have to be strong. My mission is not over.
Man, the lack of cohesion amongst the family at a time when its unison and harmony is so vital to the healing process put tremendous additional stress on Marquise, on top of the pain and suffering he faced losing his only daughter to the hands of someone who was called to protect and serve. Seeing his baby girl become the latest name in the ever-growing statistic of innocent people of color gunned down by law enforcement was far too much to bear, and on Saturday, November 9th, exactly 4 weeks after his daughter's death, he would suffer a fatal heart attack and passed away at the age of 58. His funeral would be held in the same church that he had done his news interviews in just weeks earlier, and he would be buried next to his daughter. A family spokesperson said that he had no heart issues and that he, quote, ultimately succumbed to a broken heart. He just never recovered from the grieving process. He was battling to be a part of his daughter's life till the very end. I think it just got the best of him. His family, however, wanted a criminal investigation into his death, but it's unknown what, if anything, ever came of these requests. Meanwhile, as the social unrest raged on in Atatiana's death, there was tremendous pressure for the evidence to be presented to a grand jury for a formal indictment, and expeditiously, Dean would be the only officer to face a murder charge in Tarrant County for a shooting committed while on duty, and after 2 months, he would finally be indicted by a grand jury on December 20th, 2019, and Atatiana's mother, Yolanda, who had been hospital bound for much of this time, was excited to see some justice moving forward. In interviews from the hospital bed, Yolanda Carr had spoken about the recent indictment.
We're going to miss her this Christmas, but I'm so glad that they finally indicted that man on murder, because he murdered my baby. He murdered my baby in my home. She wasn't doing anything, and she didn't do anything wrong. But at least we know that justice was served, and he will be accountable for murder.
Now, Yolanda wasn't able to attend Atatiana's funeral, as her health had rapidly declined, but the pastor did read a statement that she wrote, where she praised her daughter's humble boldness, her drive to succeed, and her loving nature. One line in particular read, "You said you were going to change the world, and I believe you still will." This tragedy took an even bigger toll on her mother's health, which had already been deteriorating. She would return back to her home, the same home that Atatiana lost her life in. And on January 9th, 2020, exactly 2 months after the death of Marquise, and less than 3 months after her daughter's death, she would pass away from congestive heart failure at the age of 55. With the family suffering 3 losses in 3 months, you'd think things would lighten up, but things only worsened when just 4 months later, in May of 2020, neighbor James Smith, who had been tasked with checking up on the home since Yolanda's passing, once again noticed the front door wide open, this time with the screen door and everything. He wouldn't dare call police though. He'd march right over to the house himself to find the place completely vandalized. Someone had broken into the home through the same window that the family had purchased to replace the one that Dean shot through. The person, or persons, then trashed the place and stole several items from the home. Tati's sister Ashley would take to Facebook and wrote, "I am beyond words. Just know that you are fueling the fire." Her sister Amber said, "They took things that they could get money for, so I feel bad for them because they're surviving, but it ain't right." As for James himself, he felt hopeless having to continuously deliver bad news to the family. When Yolanda died months earlier, it was he who had to call the sisters and break the news to them. He said, "For whatever reason, the Lord has my eyes on this property," as he's been on the block for 50 years. He also said, "I've been watching this property before a house was even on the property." They reluctantly filed a police report, and officers would come by and assess the scene without firing a weapon this time, and they took down the report, but it's unknown if any suspects were ever apprehended in this situation. As for their sister's killing, it became frustrating for the family over time seeing other victims like George Floyd and Dante Wright, who were killed years later, have their cases taken to trial in a timely manner, whereas Atatiana's family would be in for a long wait as the trial date for Officer Dean would be pushed back multiple times over a 2-year period, with the backlog in court stemming from COVID-19. Then it was postponed again when the defense witnesses were conveniently unavailable for court. Then you had Dean's defense attorneys filing a motion for a change of venue, claiming that the media coverage made it impossible for Dean to receive a fair and impartial trial. When this didn't work, the attorney claimed to have health issues, and the judge would postpone the trial a third time. Later, the defense attorneys would ask for more time as they had higher priority cases. The judge agreed and pushed it back a fourth time. By now, it was the summer of 2022, and the attorneys asked that their own personal vacation plans be considered for yet another pushback. The judge was completely agitated by this point and denied their request, so Dean's attorneys filed a motion asking for a completely new judge, claiming that he had grown increasingly hostile, overbearing, and rude to them. I wonder why. Either way, the case would be assigned a new judge and would be postponed a fifth time and would not start until December 5th, 2022. In between all of this, Atatiana's family had done numerous interviews. Her sister Amber, looking like a young Jill Scott, would spearhead much of these specials in her quest to get answers.
At this point, I'm dealing with an assassination.
Why do you call it that?
Because that is exactly what it is. I know I'm crying and it looks like I'm sad, but I'm really angry. Being angry caused so much stress to my heart. So it's more sadness than anger for sure. But I'm still angry, very angry.
But it wasn't all gloom. There would be many celebrations of life for Atatiana. The family founded the Atatiana Project, a nonprofit organization helping to inspire, educate, and grow upcoming generations from under-resourced communities by providing access to high-quality education in the fields of STEAM. They also host an annual weekend event called Pull Up for Tay every second weekend of October, which includes the Tay Day Parade, a community festival, an annual gala, among other events. And they used every opportunity to keep her name at the forefront of the conversation, as her case was not about to slip through the cracks.
So when we're marching and protesting and posting about the Michael Brown Jr.'s and the Atatiana Jeffersons of the world, tell your friends to pull up.
Back in 2021, artist Janelle Monáe collaborated with many female artists like Beyonce, Zoe Kravitz, among others, for the Say Her Name single. And on the song, Alicia Keys would chant Atatiana Jefferson, say her name, and don't you forget it. So when the trial finally began, 3 years and 3 months after the murder, all eyes were present. They called several witnesses, including the neighbor who had made the call and the dispatcher, and inquired why the call was listed as an open structure call instead of a welfare check. Zion, now 11 years of age, would also take the stand.
Is it good to tell lies?
Yes, sir.
What happens when people tell lies?
You can get in big trouble.
You get in big trouble for telling a lie. So, can you promise me that everything we're going to talk about today will be true things?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Zion.
He would be grilled by the defense as to whether or not his aunt was holding the weapon upright or down by her side, basically trying to justify the notion that Officer Dean was acting out of fear for his own life. Officer Carol Darch would also testify and stated that the last 3 years of her life had been hell. She admitted that the pair did not announce themselves upon arrival at the home, and said that she saw no weapon in Atatiana's hands, only Atatiana's face, which she can never get out of her head for as long as she lives, and that she doesn't know why Dean shot the 28-year-old, but that her main worries today is the well-being of Zion after all this time. Officer Dean would finally take the stand, and from his standpoint, they approached the situation as if it were a robbery in progress. His defense pointed to the main doors being opened and items being scattered on the living room floor as justification for assuming the place was being ransacked, and that the perpetrators were likely still in the house. As for them never announcing themselves as officers, it's highly suspected that they were applying the element of surprise.
If you had announced yourself Fort Worth Police, then maybe Atatiana Jefferson would still be alive, correct?
Maybe.
He did say that there were probably some things he could have done better.
I saw a silhouette. I was looking right down the barrel of the gun. When my vision cleared, then I observed the person that we now know as Miss Jefferson.
I know you're crying right now, but on October 12, 2019, you weren't crying when you decided not to administer CPR to Atatiana Jefferson, were you?
I didn't decide not to.
Either way, on December 19th, 2022, the jury would find him guilty, but only of manslaughter. And while Botham's killer received only 10 years for her crime, Officer Dean will receive 11 years and 10 months for killing Atatiana. Though justice was only partially served, yet and still, another tragedy was looming over the horizon for her family, as by now, Amber's health had deteriorated. She was present for the first half of the trial, but was hospital bound by the latter half of the trial, as her heart was failing and she was ineligible for a heart transplant. And on January 30th, 2023, with her family and her sons by her side, she would pass away of heart failure at the age of 33 years old. Amber and Atatiana were just 11 months apart in age. Man, gone far too soon. But this wasn't all in vain, as later in 2023, the family won a $3.5 million settlement, the largest in the city's history, which is due to go to Zion in the form of a base amount in a trust to provide for his living expenses, a college savings plan, attorney's fees, and an annuity fund with scheduled payouts all the way until he's 40 years old. This stemmed from a combination of two separate lawsuits filed from Atatiana's estate and Zion's mother Amber before she passed away. She had to make sure her baby was well taken care of. Today, the eldest sister, Ashley, raises Amber's boys, Zion and Zayden, and they will forever keep the memories of their loved ones in their hearts. Also, the Fort Worth City Council unanimously voted to rename the local community center Atatiana Jefferson Community Center at Hillside in her honor. Today, there are two different organizations in Atatiana's name. The Atatiana Project, held down by her mother's side of the family, and the Atatiana Jefferson Foundation, held down by her father's side of the family. Rest in peace to Atatiana Jefferson, who protected her nephew in those last moments as her life was taken for no reason. Nothing she did wrong, and she had to die for what, man? But also, rest in peace to her father, her mother, and her sister, whose health sparked rapid declines after this senseless tragedy. A family gone behind the actions of a wicked, wayward cop, all too eager to kill when given the license to do so. Today he holds little remorse for his actions and has attempted to appeal his conviction twice. He remains confined in the W.F. Ramsey unit just south of Houston, Texas, and is eligible for parole in 2028. Should have been 3028, but we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, this is Justified by Jury. Y'all know how to hit that like, and y'all know how to hit that subscribe. If you want to, do so, and I will catch y'all in the next video.